You've all been waiting for. Let's get this show on the road. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our plenary panel. Now, before we do that, I want to hear if you guys are ready. Are you ready? Nah. You know how this goes. We do this a couple more times. Are you ready? Yeah. Wicked. So, let's introduce our plenary panel. So Walter Pinto is going to be our plenary panel moderator today. He's a highly accomplished, deeply experienced industry executive who has spent his entire career in the downstream industry, having recently retired from LyondellBasell after 25 years with the company. At the time of his retirement, Walter served as a senior director, where he had responsibility for the global project execution, engineering, turnarounds, maintenance, and reliability functions, and as well as being responsible for supporting 55 different manufacturing sites in 17 countries. I could go on. I really could. But for now, you know him as the man, the myth, the legend that is Walter Pinto, and he is very excited to get us going. Thank you all very much for your time. Cheers.
Thank you, Kerr. All right, that's an exciting introduction there.
Thank you. Good job.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
The man, the myth. I love it.
Yeah, all right. So let's get going on our panel discussions here. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Downstream 2019 conference. I'm sure you're all looking forward to it. And it's an exciting time in our industry. Especially given the cheaper feedstock that we have. It's really unlocked a lot of investment in the downstream industry. But one of the biggest concerns for all the executives in this industry is as the cost of building projects go up, we could lose the advantage that we have, feedstock advantage that we have, and we could have our investment in downstream can come down. So given that background, we put together a very distinguished panel today. We have senior executives of major EPC firms. So we'll ask some questions. I'll talk through what are the capital outlay look like for the industry next 5 years. What are the challenges? What are the risks in our business? What are the major issues executing a large project? And what did we learn from wave one projects? Also, we'll talk about some of the technology and how does it impact to us. So let me get going with this and let me give a quick introduction to the panel members here. Stuart Brady assumed the role of President and CEO of KBR in June 2014. He joined the board on the same year. Prior to KBR, Stuart had a long career with Worley Parsons, where he held the positions of Group Managing Director and responsible for global operation across 40 countries. Alistair Cathcart is president of Bechtel Oil, Gas, and Chemicals business, and is also a member of Bechtel Group board. He joined Bechtel in 1989 and has experience working in 5 continents and across multiple businesses in Bechtel. Samik Mukherjee is a group senior vice president for projects for McDermott International. In this role, he is responsible for leading McDermott's global operation and all project delivery functions. Prior to McDermott, Samik was the executive vice president at Technique FMC. He has worked in leadership roles in Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa regions. Andrew Stewart is CEO of Wood's largest business unit, Asset Solutions Americas, where he leads a team of more than 18,000 people. Since joining Wood in 2009, he has served in a number of leadership roles in the United States, Europe, Canada, Latin America, and Caribbean. So welcome, gentlemen. It's really a powerful panel. Most of them grew up outside United States. We have 2 Scotsmen, 1 Aussie, and 1 Samik grew up in India. So a truly international panel. So just like we do in everything in our business, we start with a safety discussion. So I really wanted to talk through safety. And let's talk through it and then delve into the other side of the business. Stuart, in KBR, you talk about zero harm program and talk about values and don't talk about statistics and numbers and developing a safety culture. Help us understand what you do to drive the right safety culture in a diverse construction workforce.
No, it's good. Thank you, Walter. Good question. And I would like to, hold you up a little bit for starting with safety.
Yeah.
It's very unusual in a conference to do so, and I think it's exactly the right thing to start with.
Yeah.
So terrific. So really, I think the whole thing about safety for KBR anyway is really culture and really sort of getting one's self-belief that zero is achievable. But really that comes down to leadership. And I think when you look at construction itself, the typical thing is to do like toolbox talks and all the things like that you have in a general site condition. And you've got lots of visible site safety signs and lots of communication going on. But one of the things that we found really worked at KBR was actually leading from the front, as you should do. And that's getting our people out the site offices, our project management team, our construction management team, and getting them out the office and actually going to all the toolbox talks and actually leading by example, making sure that the workforce understood that it wasn't just words, that people were actually walking the talk and they had a firm belief that looking after yourselves and those around you was a core value to the company, and as a consequence of that, a core value to them. And that's really made a huge difference in terms of actually being able to touch so many more people in terms of that leadership.
That's great. Alistair, you have a very diverse construction fields in Bechtel, but you strongly believe in stop work authority. And so what is your view on construction safety now in our industry?
Well, I think in our industry, first of all, I think we've made great strides. Yeah. I think we've come a long way. I think all of us have, if you look back over the last 2 decades, we've come a long way. But I think we've plateaued out, and I think the challenge that we all face now is how we're going to make that next step change in terms of safety. And like Stuart said, I really like the fact that we're talking about safety first, because how can we be a great industry, a great place to work if we're hurting people? Yeah. How can we be a great place to work if we're hurting people? Yes, we're going to talk about the challenges of major project delivery and cost and schedule and innovation and all this type of thing, but first and foremost, we have to stop hurting people. Yeah. And I think that means that we believe in Bechtel that we've got to move away from this sort of compliance-based approach more towards a risk-based approach. And as Stuart said, and leveraging what KBR is doing, get empowered, give empowerment to the people that are doing the work. Having that peer-on-peer engagement, giving people the power, doesn't matter where you are in the organization, from the lowest level to the highest level, to interact, to engage, to make a difference. Yeah. I think is really what we view, I suspect all across this panel, is going to be the next thing that makes the step change in terms of making sure that everyone comes home at the end of the day the same way that they turned up for work.
Yeah. Thank you. And Samik, you guys, Alice talked about values, talked about attitude and behaviors. So how do you drive the right behaviors in your organization, in your construction workforce?
Thanks, Walter. I think, Stuart and Alistair are talking. Something which is very, very important is about commitment. So we, in McDermott, the way we see it is what Stuart mentioned is taking the lead. And that comes from absolute top. I mean, there is no discussion about whether safety is going to be traded off versus cost, schedule, client pressure. Safety is an absolute commitment. So what we have done, if you have to drive the behaviors and the actions of the workforce, which are very, very diverse, because we all are doing projects across the globe, is to get right from the top till the end an ownership about HSE. And we have done something called McDermott Operational Values, which are kind of linked with international oil and gas producers' life-saving rules, more related to hazards, and to see how we execute projects with the risks we have and how we manage it right from the top. But very important, the word which you said, Walter, is something where we face that challenge every day, is the word behavior. Yeah. So, how do you impact behavior of a person? How do you change it for something where safety becomes more important than the speed? And this we have seen, the focus has been in the industry, and I'm sure all my esteemed colleagues in the organization, the focus has been in the last few years a lot on behavior-based systems. Yeah. So it's very scientific now, where you get into specific issues linked with culture, language, backgrounds. To give you an example, for example, we have a lot of fabrication yards. The workforce comes from the shipping industry. The way you see HSE in shipping industry is quite different than how we see HSE in our industry, right? So we need to look into that training. And one thing which we found very challenging, and I think as an industry we are learning a lot through this, is it has been about communication. And I think Alistair talked about that. It's not only top-down, but how do we get the entire workforce and the craftsmen to discuss that? Technology is assisting that, and I believe there is a big shift happening on that, and we are following that through.
Thank you, Samik. Andrew, you're doing a lot of things on the digital technology side in Wood. Anything you can share on applying digital technology to drive safety improvement? We talked about behaviors, hazards, and everything. Talk through anything you are doing there.
Yeah, sure, Walter, happy to. So we had a bit of a breathe out moment. We recognise 60% of our payroll is craft professionals, and the exposure hours for our craft professionals are unforgiving in the safety space. And when we bought Wood Group and AMEC Foster Wheeler together, we had 10,000 documents in our safety management system. So we were in fact introducing risk and setting our craft labour up to hurt themselves through confusion. So the first adoption of digital and technology was to take 10,000 documents and boil it down to 35 high-risk work method statements and make it available on an app, so that at every work site, in every location, it's available at the front line where it matters most. And all of you can download that app in the Apple Store. But that's 10,000 to 35 through the app. The second thing we did, our propensity to kill someone in our business is still driving. Driving is at the top of the exposure list for us. And we've got thousands of vehicle fleet running around along the Gulf Coast and in the shale basins. And one of the big investments was to put in-vehicle monitoring systems into the vehicle fleet. And this was not about punitive accountability where we take disciplinary action on someone that breaks a driving rule, because we've all got unsafe driving behaviours. Yeah. This was about giving the drivers a behavioural report on the unsafe behaviours that they exhibit, so that they want to form safer driving habits to keep themselves safe. And we found that's been a transformational step change in our vehicle incidences. And the third and final thing that we're just in the beta testing phase now is predictive analytics. And that is taking the supervisor's daily report and turning it into actionable insights at the job site for the day ahead. Okay. So basically there are 35 factors that we ask the supervisor to fill in their daily report. They correlate directly to whether they're in a high-risk zone or a low-risk zone for having a recordable injury in the day ahead. But more importantly, give them 3 things that they can do to get themselves in a more low-risk zone on that work site. So we're finding those digital tools is really about simplification, demystifying and making it really pragmatic where the exposure hours are unforgiving.
Excellent. Yeah, I think there is a great opportunity to apply technology in the safety side. So great discussion on safety. I think we wanted to spend some good amount of time. Let's talk through what's the outlook for our industry next 5 years. Stuart, how do you see spending in the downstream industry, mainly on the Americas region? And also you see a lot of foreign entrants coming, a significant percentage. They say almost 65% of $200 billion that will be spent downstream is foreign entrants. What do you see the risks around them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think really on the capital spending side, I think most of you know that the supply demand on LNG is going to cross around 2022, and there's about the estimate's 100 million tons of shortfall. I mean, that's significant if you just think about that for a second, and it could be even more, and it's being driven by China. It's being driven by China, not so much around their need for energy, it's actually social. And it's to do with the fact that they're actually replacing coal-fired power stations with gas-fired power stations to clean up the air in and around China. And so we don't see that demand slowing at all. We see that demand driving. And of course, it takes 4 to 5 years to build an LNG project. So already we're a little bit behind in that cycle. So I think and obviously with the shale explosion and as you say, the cheap feedstock, I think what we can see really is the industry. It's a great time to be part of this industry. We do live in cycles. Right. We're actually at the right point of the cycle as this second wave comes through. And I think what we see is in North America is this certainly going on for 2, 3, 4 years. And when you get start to lose your hair and you get a bit older, you realize that up cycles tend to last longer than people expect, and as down cycles tend to last longer than people expect also. But the up cycle here is that, talking 3-4 years, but at the end of the day, all projects don't happen when they're supposed to, and you'll know that, Walter, from your history. And for a number of factors that they get pushed out, and whether that's through actually just investment decisions or the fact that there's labor shortages or just pressure on the supply chain drives costs out, so they stagger it out. So I suspect we're in for good times for quite a few years to come.
Great, yeah. Andrew Wood talks about life cycle service in your business. How do you see investment in the maintenance side of it? You guys focus on new construction, maintenance, small projects. How do you see investments in that area for the next 5 years?
Yeah, Walter, we see probably single-digit growth, to be honest, so relatively stable and modest activity levels. We have a view about measured risk appetite, so we tend to play in the sub-billion-dollar project and O&M space. And again, nothing electric or volatile, just good constant growth. So most of that growth is in our sweet spot. It would be in incremental refinery improvements, in some specialty chemicals, and even some methanol developments is where we're seeing activity.
Okay, good. Samik, tariffs have been in a big discussion now, and some of the projects that got approved saw a significant impact and a lot of trade tensions. What do you see tariffs playing a role, or how do you see that impact in the downstream industry investments?
I think it's a great question, Walter, because this is the first question being asked by every customer. So actually, I'm looking for that crystal ball. It's because the tariff situation is changing every day. But yeah, jokes apart, I think it's one of those issues which are becoming very critical in terms of the capex spending in United States. We do see some challenges like importing of commodities like steel. We also see the challenges on the export side of LNG going to the Asian side. So the customers, there's a lot of discussions today in terms of this, how does the tariff situation gonna impact my project? The way we are seeing it as a service provider is to look at it as a risk management, right? So there are many things which happens in our business, whether it's political risk, whether it's productivity risk. Tariff is becoming a big issue of risk mitigation. So for us, it's a collaborative approach with the customer to talk about the execution plan, go through it together. And we are very hopeful, and that's what we are seeing with the customers. I'm sure Alistair and Stuart and Andrew see that. It's such a fluid situation. Customers are open to discuss how we can mitigate the risk with a balanced relationship about it. We can't predict it. They can't predict that. But it's a critical issue as we move forward. It's in most of the projects a key discussion.
Great, yeah. Alistair, LNG projects, there are a lot of projects going on. The first wave of projects have been challenging. The owners are thinking about whether the EPC companies are geared up to execute the LNG projects, and it's a very tight. What is Bechtel doing in that space, and how do you convince we can execute an LNG project in a very successful manner?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there's been a lot of good projects delivered around the world.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us have some very, very experienced teams that have worked on LNG projects. Obviously, the wave of work that was in Australia, the wave of work that's been going on in the US Gulf Coast. So I think you would find that a lot of us would say we actually have got deep, deep core competence. Key teams that have been developed, some of them on tough jobs. And that we've learned, and then we're ready to deploy these resources to make sure that these projects are successful going forward. I think on the US Gulf Coast uniquely, there are a lot of things going for the LNG projects that are here that are going to satisfy the 100 million ton demand or more that Stuart mentioned before. I do believe we have a very experienced and skilled workforce. I don't think that we talk a lot about productivity challenges, we talk a lot about project challenges, and the easiest thing to do is to blame the troops. And I don't think it's a troops problem. I think in Bechtel we believe it's an officer's problem. And what we need to do is to make these projects be successful is to lean forward and make sure that we do the engineering in the right way, the procurement in the right way to facilitate the best possible construction. And I'm sure we have lots of different views in the room around what that right way is, but we really believe the craft are available, the craft are competent, the craft are committed, and we have to set up the environment whereby they can be successful. And I think we can do that. I really believe that we can do that, and we can demonstrate to the world that we can deliver the next wave of mega projects here in the US Gulf Coast safely, ahead of schedule and under budget.
Good. Yeah. I want to follow up on the tariff discussion. Any views, any input, any thoughts from you guys? What's Mick said on the tariffs, and how are you seeing from your end, your projects?
I mean, I think it's more, it drives more uncertainty. And foreign investment sort of depends on certainty. You know, if you think about yourself, you don't invest your money if you've got a 50-50 chance. You know, you're looking for things that you can, you know, ultimately a strong fiscal regime or legal regime, and you know, and really stability of those factors, because it's risky enough building a project and making sure it comes in on time and on budget and safely and to quality. So I think the tariffs themselves, I mean, my own personal view is they will be resolved. But I think they need to be resolved in a manner that removes uncertainty, because I think it will make people more cautious about foreign investment.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of the investment today is coming from overseas into the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Good. I think that's a good discussion. Any other threats that you see for the $200 billion that is planned to spend next 5 years? Any other thoughts?
Well, I think you know, I think a lot of us talk about the challenge of construction productivity. We all know, we've seen all of the graphs, we've seen the McKinsey reports about the fact that I think the construction industry is the only industry since the Second World War that's got worse, hasn't improved its construction productivity. As someone who grew up in construction, working in the garden spots around the world, you know, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, Wisconsin, which was colder than Kazakhstan. But, you know, that goes to, that hurts. And I think what we've got to do as an industry is really go and target and addressing the root causes of what this challenge is that we face. And there's a multitude of ways that we can do that. But I think giving that, you know, it's like what Andrew said about safety, putting the data in the hands of the people who are doing the work, whether that's safety data so you can make a better decision, whether that's the engineering data so that you can better plan your work, whether that's the material data so that you know that it's there when you need to get it, or it's even simply your crew data so that you know how to set yourself up to be successful for that task in hand at that day. I think that's really, really important. As we all leave here tonight or this afternoon, you know when you're going to get home. You know the route that you're going to drive. You know what time you're going to leave. You call your wife up or your partner up, and you give them an arrival date or an arrival time, and you're probably going to be pretty much around what it is. You know the time of day. You know the environment. You know the circumstances. That's the level of planning and detail that we need to get into in these mega projects. I believe it's an excuse that we can't deliver. I think if we get into that same level of planning, we can be predictable and say, in 5 years' time, we're going to be done. Yeah. And I think technology will help us get there. Behavior will help us get there. Collaboration will help us get there. But please, 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 let's stop blaming the man and woman on the ground.
Yeah. I think, Alistair, you said it right. It's a leadership issue rather than the labor issue, as how we set up the site, how the logistics are set up, when engineering deliverables, is the material on time, even where the lunch tent is, all that plays a big role. And even phase 1, phase 2 side, very few project team give enough thoughts to that, thinking through project. So Andrew from Woodside, how are you guys thinking through in that space to make sure you set up the person in the field, the construction person, as you said, to success and think through productivity right from the beginning of the project?
Yeah, I think, Walter, it's a great point. I think what technology brings in this space is digitalising the field really puts the onus on front-end discipline, exactly what Alistair mentioned. And I think we see the biggest opportunity for driving tool time to be really twofold, which is the allocation of competent labour in the right order to match the critical path, supported by material availability on site. Right. So the two work streams that really speak to that are adaptive work planning, which is around the work breakdown structure up front, but it's also in the electronic packaging of work. Mm-hmm. So we do expect our supervisors now to be running around with an iPad as they would value their toolbox. Mm-hmm. And the idea of the work pack is every morning on site, you synchronise the work pack and it reorientates job cards that reflect those that are near critical path where material is receipted on the site. That gives the supervisor the best opportunity to allocate competent labour to that job card to move the critical path forward. In the past, I still go to job sites today where a supervisor's in charge of the Enigma code. It's a P6 schedule, it's a material status report, and it's a list of labour with competency certificates. And he's trying to decipher all of that and drive a productive outcome. So I think digital enables real front-end discipline because it is all set up front in the stable that enables our supervision to be in the field, leading demonstrable controls on risk and not having to decipher multiple inputs.
Okay, great. Samik, always we say in a project, the way the construction goes, the project will go. And within that construction, the piping, as the piping goes, the project goes, And I had my own experiences from the owner side. And it's really a challenge. So what's McDermott doing? What's your approach and the strategies and the productivity side? And also talk through anything that you might be doing on crafts development, whether it's training, development, retention, attracting people to our business, anything that you guys do in that space.
I think it's a great question, Walter, and I think Alistair talked a bit about it as well as Andrew. So for us, I'd just like to share with you a bit about some recent challenges. We have been executing 2 massive LNG projects after the merger of McDermott and CB&I around 10 months ago. So we have been executing 2 world-class projects. One is Cameron LNG in Louisiana, and the other is Freeport. We have very strong partners, but we have seen some very specific challenges just because of the number of projects we're talking about. So if you take a 60-mile radius of Cameron project, there are 36 projects ongoing in that area. Right. Considering the parking restrictions we have, the labor workforce is basically a moving workforce, right? And obviously we were looking at piping, but what we found, very strangely, was 2 other disciplines became a major bottleneck. One of them is electrical and instrumentation, because in terms of the capacity that was available. And the other one, which was very interesting for us as a lessons learned, was about cold insulation. Not hot insulation, but cold insulation, which is very specific for LNG, very specific for ethylene, and that's massive. And we have, just to get 1,200 people, we needed 6 or 7 companies to get on board. So now, as Alistair said, one of the things which McDermott brings in is we love to roll down and get onto the trench. That's what we love to do. So what we have done, our strategy is slightly different, but we have very strong fabrication capability. That's what the legacy McDermott brings in. We have large fabrication yards in China, Indonesia, Middle East, Mexico. So we are bringing in a concept of maximum off-site modularization. So we are trying to balance the equation of direct hiring and off-site modularization to balance the risk of productivity at site. So moving forward, if you see today, we are doing a very large project where Andrew is involved for ExxonMobil, which is called the Gulf Coast Venture, GCGV project. We are doing the entire plant modularized in our fab yard, thus reducing the footprint from 3,000 people at peak to 270 people at peak, so a factor 10.
Right.
So that's like a massive reduction of, now you see this brings 2 things for us. is it's not only reduces the risk of HSE, but it has improved the constructability of the project because of the access it's giving to us on the other parts. You're not modularizing everything, right? So this is the balance. The other thing which I very much agree with Alistair, it's about pride of people, right? So you have to bring to the project teams, we have fantastic project leaders in each of our companies, back them up. Yeah. If we back those project leaders, they build teams. And what we have seen, these successful teams move from project to project. Right. And as McDermott, what we have seen, for piping, E&I, we have these core teams which perform like a factor 2 or 3 because they are so well used to how we work. And as you just said, Andrew, about they know the sequence. So we're using them from moving from project to project. It's like a cult. And the last part for us, is obviously bringing the technology vector in terms of productivity. And there are 2 areas I would like to share with you where we are working on. And it's quite interesting. We have found in our very large projects, the tool time, that the efficient use of tools for really productive work is amazingly low. Yeah. In terms of the welding machine, the crane, the diesel generator, if you just do an analysis of how they are used at a site, and then you think, why is that? And that goes back exactly to what we have been discussing. It's about the sequence of the work. Right. If you do the right engineering, right procurement, but not for its own sake, but to drive the right construction, you will have much better utilization of your tools and people. Right. So if you have to give them the chance for success, drive everything else, not as EPC, but as CPE. Yeah. And then that's the approach we are taking. So in principle, basically modularization, drive the people, and make them believe that the projects are driving our business, and get the technology to get the right sequence. So that's where we drive.
Excellent, Samik. Stuart, you have a very big portfolio outside the energy business in KBR. When I was a plant manager, we used to always try to imitate a pilot to an operator at the plant, the checklist, how methodically they go, trying to bring something value from outside our energy business into energy business. And what do you see us in the downstream or the energy side of the business that we can learn that from outside in different industry?
I mean, just heaps. I think it's probably everyone in this room would agree that our industry, maybe not on the downhole side, but the drilling piece, but certainly above ground, have been slow to adopt technology and digital solutions, and we're all trying now to catch up a little bit. At KBR, we do a lot of work for NASA. We're one of the leaders in services for NASA, and one of the things that's, when you're dealing with NASA, their approach to systems engineering and project management, going back to what Shamik was saying, is they can't afford to get it wrong. Yeah. If you think of the consequence with NASA to get it wrong, it's just catastrophic. Right. And so their discipline around following their processes, which have been through the ringer, if you like, in terms to get those processes right. And we're the same. We're an industry that's, we've got so many good lessons learned of how to do it and how not to do it, that our processes and systems are actually good. Yeah. And I would say that's the same for everyone that's on this stage today. But do we follow them? And do we allow ourselves to get out of sync? Do we allow ourselves to start building in the field before the engineering is complete? And the answer to that question is we've all done it, and it all ends up badly, as you will know from your own history. But the bottom line here is that learning from NASA is that they don't do that. And they get a product that works because it has to work. And I think really maintaining that discipline in the way that you actually execute your work is absolutely critical. And often you'll get, and realism is a great word, because realism in the project environment is often not used. Because project people, and there'll be lots in this room, by their very nature are can-do people. And so you'll get people that come to my office and say, well, we can build this facility in 12 months. And I'll say, okay, well, what's the world record? So 14 months. Why do you think we can do it in 12? Well, because we're project people and we can do it better. And the answer to that is you can't. And so you have to have realism, and I think that goes for the owners as well. I think the owners have a big role to play in actually ensuring budgets and schedules and things are actually realistic and can be achieved. And so, you start to learn that from other parts. But some specifics which are quite interesting. So we're doing a lot of work in robotics at the moment at NASA. And if you just think of the application in the energy sector, where we do work in very unsafe environments. And so you can actually replace operators by putting robots or robotic arms or however you want to frame it into those environments and take the person out of that environment. And so I think there's a huge amount of learnings we can take from other industries and actually bring them into the energy section.
Yeah, exactly. I think especially our industry, pretty ripe for some of the lessons learned from other industry. And you talked about lessons learned, and all of us have significant scars with us on project management. Alistair, one of the things that talked about is collaboration, teamwork between owners, EPC firms, suppliers, and so on. From a Bechtel view perspective, what's collaboration means to you? How does it play?
I think it means us all wearing a KBR lanyard, doesn't it? I think what collaboration isn't, it's not just having conversations. It's so much more. And I think it's something that actually Bechtel in the past wasn't that good at. We thought it was delivering what was required, at the end of a job was all about the results, and not how you delivered that was really key as well to our customers. So I think the projects that have been successful that we've seen over recent years is where you have this collaboration, where you have this, and Sam mentioned it before, I think you build this respect between the parties. And that means that you do the hard yards. You hold yourself accountable for the things that you're responsible for on a project. You don't blame others. You deliver. And with that delivery, you earn the respect of the other partners involved in the project. And with respect comes trust. And I think with trust, we talk a lot about transparency. I have a saying that I use a lot about, transparency is about moving the unsaid to the said. About moving the unsaid to the said. So if ever you leave a meeting and you haven't said something that you wanted to say, I don't think you've got a true collaboration.
Yeah.
I think that's the test of a true collaboration. When something goes wrong, and on these mega projects, things always go wrong, do you pick up the phone and call your own people first? Or do you call your people plus the client's people plus the supply chain's people, and you get all of the experts involved in addressing the issue? That's collaboration, that's transparency. And I think it's mission critical for us going forward. We want to provide great places to work for our people. We want our people to be afforded to grow. We want the owners' people to feel vested in the project and to be part of that successful delivery. And it's only by collaborating that I think we're going to make these projects truly be successful.
Yeah, and I want to explore a little bit here on the collaboration, trust, transparency piece. That's a very common terminology used. I worked all my career at the owner company, and that's always a discussion with the suppliers, EPC firms, and so on. But Andrew, talk through that a little bit from the Wood side, and also based on your lessons learned from Wave 1 project, and how does it all play together there?
Yeah, I think I might use the US Gulf Coast as a bit of a case study to answer that question, Walter. I think we need to do better together at the next tranche of investment. Mm-hmm. And I think we just need to breathe out that, through Wave 1, there were unpredictable, opaque project outcomes that grossly ran over budget and were unpredictable. And there were very few service providers that actually made money along the Gulf Coast during that Wave 1 investment. So I think together we need to do better by some of the points that Alistair touched. I think part of that, we all own a piece of that, and I think through that Wave 1 there was a commodification of the service provider as offering, but there was also an inappropriate allocation of risk. So risk profiles were asymmetrical, and they tend to flow right down to the supply chain, which offered very little protection ultimately. And it's about breathing out and coming together in a trusted partnership with transparency, where there is fair reward for fair work, with the allocation of risk appropriate for who can control what, and a genuine understanding that at the end of the day, this needs to be mutually beneficial. that the project needs to deliver the investment outcomes. The service provider actually needs to make money. And I think in the downstream along the Gulf Coast, there's been very little investment in revolutionary technology adoption because the service providers are on such slow margins and they can't afford to invest here when we can invest in power and renewables, in upstream, we can do other things. So I do think we just need to breathe out. We need to do better at the collaboration. We can't enforce collaboration in contractual terms. There has to be a stylistic matching as well. There has to be an honest conversation about risk allocation. And I think what you'll see from the service providers and the customers being much more attentive to, you know what, this opportunity isn't the right opportunity for us to enter in together to execute.
Yeah.
And I think there'll just be a high level of mutual respect along that decision making.
Yeah. Good. Samik, you're a technology provider. How do you see, from a lessons learned or future project impact, the technology provider with the engineering construction playing a role into that?
Yeah, I think, this is sort of the heart of what we are doing now. As McDermott, after the merger with CB&I, we have Lummus Process Technology, which is like one of the jewels in the crown of US oil and gas process technology development over the last 50 years. So, the way we see it is, I think I refer to what Alistair mentioned, is how do we become a partner with our customer? And also Andrew is mentioning the same. I mean, the days of transactional relationship, we have to find a way to overcome that. So the way we are looking at it is, through Lummus Process Technologies, we are engaging with our customers very early, trying to then use that partner relationship to develop execution plans and risk management with them. But most importantly is also to benchmark. Because if you have a technology and you are doing multiple projects, you look at the quantities, the cost, the schedule, and as Stuart mentioned, if there is an outlier in terms of cost and schedule, you have to say, hey guys, what's happening here? So that's, I think, one of the key factors. So today, we are having, something like using the technology to pull it all the way through. That means remaining as a partner with the client, having partners with other EPC contractors to drive it all the way through. And we are seeing, just to give you the US business right now, in last 4 or 5 years, we had like around $8 billion worth of projects driven from technology to EPC. Right now, because of the second wave, as we call it, just based on Lummus Process Technology, we see around $39 billion worth of projects linked with that. Obviously, we cannot execute everything, but with partners, with clients, we're trying to see how we collaborate from technology to commissioning. So that's the way we are working.
Excellent. Stuart, there are a lot of major projects that are associated with turnarounds, and I've seen enough of them go wrong integrating with turnarounds. One of the lessons learned from wave one was how do you integrate projects with the turnaround and how do you execute? You can all prepare, but you got a short window there to all tie in and everything go. Any experience, any lessons learned from KBR side in that, and what we can do as an industry doing better in that perspective?
Yeah, quite a big lesson learned to the extent we actually went out and bought a turnaround company. So that we could actually bring those people into the execution and the planning. So I think it's really, it is a mindset when you're doing a turnaround. It's all in the pre-planning. It's all in the work before the execution and the coordination because you are interfacing with a completely different group of people in terms of the operators versus the capital projects people. Right. And so you've really got to integrate that into the execution planning as you're moving forward. Yeah. And I think the mistake that we have made in the past, I'm sure the industry's made in the past, is to concentrate very much on the greenfield piece, and then the tie into the brownfield piece. Well, that's fine, that's easy to do, but actually that's where the rubber hits the road, particularly for an operator, as you know. So I think getting our turnaround people involved early enough, together with the customers, people in that arena, has really made a big difference. Right, yeah. So it's really it comes back to coordination, transparency, actually working together, and recognizing the challenge at the front.
Yeah. This transparency word is coming quite common, and I really, one of the things when I ran projects, always felt that how I reacted to bad news played a big role in transparency because, we executed a project with Bechtel and working with Charlie Coppola, I always told myself, always ask the question, how can I help versus be down on the contractor because that's not going to lead anyway. So there is a fact from the owner side how we react and how we more work together to solve the problem because you're going to always run into problems. But help us, any one of you. It's transparency, we always say, at the highest level of the leadership, alignment at the CEO level, we talk about transparency and all the way low. But getting it done is so difficult. It's a behavior issue because nobody wants to sometimes fess up problems thinking that they will take care of it and don't want to have client know or supplier. That's a human nature, but how do we foster a culture that can open up transparency? And also, are you working on any processes that helps people to open up without being very defensive or without getting challenged? Help us understand, if anything, you are working in that area, because I think that can help the industry significantly better.
Yeah, look, I think probably all of us are working in this, but in Bechtel, we're putting a lot of effort into what we call our digital enterprise program, where we're getting away from producing deliverables and drawings and just focusing in on data. And when you do that, and Andrew's talked about how Wood are doing that, when you just get down to concentrating on the data, the biggest thing that it helps you with is you very quickly get to one source of reality. Mm-hmm. You get one set of data, everyone can look at it, everyone can see where the schedule is, everyone can see where the engineering is, everyone can see where the construction is, the craft can see where the material is, you can see what your efficiency is on equipment. I think the way to truly get down to this transparency is to have one source of data, one reality. And if you have one reality, I think you can address the issues that will always come up in the fastest possible way to get the best possible outcome of resolving this issue. How many projects have you been on where there are at least 2 realities on the job? At least 2, and I suspect there were probably more than 2 realities in the job. So providing visibility to the data so that people address what the data is telling us, utilizing data analytics, utilizing all of, our industry needs to lean forward into this, and I think we all are to a certain degree, and doing more of that is the way that we're going to provide this transparency. There should be no doubt where we are today, what the issues are, what we've got to address, what the destination is, and when we're going to get there. And we should be putting all of our effort into how we can maneuver that way in a way that people are safe, that we can make money, that the clients can get early revenue, and so we have to get to this one source of data, this one reality.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Alistair said. We call it the single source of truth. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. But what we have seen, is traditionally this industry has been that we need to first discuss within ourselves, prepare the report, then go on a weekly or a monthly basis with the client, and then try to present the good news and try to find ways to address the bad news. And this is about leadership and about training with the teams. So the way we are doing on most of the transformational projects, and there are quite a few projects which actually needs turnaround. It's very interesting, Walter, that we found if we change to a single source of truth and live, and I think what Alistair mentioned is that same time the client sees what we are seeing. Most of the time we see the client is much more ready to help us in a difficult project if the client understands at the same time the same data as we are seeing this. Mm-hmm. So this is a big shift. It takes some, I would say that you have to support the project director and the teams, back them up. That means if there is a problem, we are with you on the trenches, we will take the hit together. And that's the kind of feeling which comes from the leadership team, executive teams, and walk the talk. Be at the site, talk to the teams, go to those meetings where it is at the live discussion with the client.
Yeah.
So it's a leadership effect as well, and completely agree with Alistair. This is where we need to go.
Yeah. So let's talk about maybe one of the lessons learned and how did impact from the Wave 1 project on contracting strategy. There is a little bit of a trend, and I'm pretty sure all of you guys have a certain view in that, and the owner companies have a certain view in that. There's an increasing trend of segregation or decoupling engineering, procurement, construction, contracts. How do you see contracting strategies playing into the success of the project, and what advantages that you would advocate would play into that? Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I think probably in commercial architecture, there's probably been very little innovation. In fact, the way that we contract today looks almost like how we contracted 40 years ago. Yeah. So I do think I don't know what the answer is, Walter, but I do think there is rich grounds there to do something quite extraordinary together. I think where it works best, and it really picks up the points that Samik and Alistair just made, we're all trying to mechanise early intervention on projects, and we're trying to translate the values of care, courage and commitment that we have in safety with a single source of truth into project delivery. So I think tends to be what tends to be more successful is if you enter a trusting partnership with a customer that's a portfolio of projects, because then everyone starts arguing in the interest of the project, not who's right and who's wrong because there's a tender coming out in 3 months. And I think that's, that does foster labour relations stability, productivity improvement. It does provide a safe place to work because people are acting in the interest of the portfolio over a more longer term horizon than the here and now on this particular project where we're entrenched in a particular position. So I do think that portfolio approach, Walter, is quite an unlocking element to contract, and whether you slice it via engineering, construction, it doesn't matter, but setting up a portfolio and making sure that through the life of that portfolio you're demonstrating value, then I think we can come together and do something quite extraordinary that we've not been able to do in a 3 bids and a buy situation.
Alistair, what are your views on that?
Well, look, I think first of all there's how you contract, but then but in front of that should be how do you plan to execute. And I think what we're seeing in many cases is that the owner community may believe that if I split it up into smaller bits, I can control it more. I can create more competition. Both points which are probably valid. But the problem is, how do you deal with all of these interfaces? And I think what we're recognising now, and I think what the panels articulated this morning, is we have to get away from thinking about the EP, the engineering piece, the procurement piece, the construction piece, the commissioning piece. And we actually have to start thinking, probably like what Stuart's mentioned in NASA and things, thinking about systems approach, thinking about designing with the end in mind, designing and how we're going to commission this, procuring this and how we're going to commission it, constructing it and how we're going to commission it. Thinking on a system basis, forget about being in an engineering silo where you can drop the ball as you pass to the procurement silo, where you can drop the ball when you pass to the construction silo. Design with the end in mind. So I think if we adopt an execution approach like that, where we can take advantage of interfaces, and I mean advantage in a positive way in terms of shortening schedules, having more effective handoffs, because there's another way you can take advantage of interfaces contractually. Yeah. An interface is an opportunity. By taking advantage of interfaces in the right way and having this integrated, engineering, procurement, construction approach, designing with the end in mind, I think we would argue, is the best way to execute the project. How you contract that, I think, is a secondary question, and that's a function of a number of factors. It's a function of the size of the owner's organisation. It's a function of where you are in the world. It's a function of the environment that you're in and things like this. I think most of us would argue that when you're in your own backyard, with sophisticated clients, with defined scope, we don't have an issue doing lump sum turnkey work, not at all.
Okay.
No issue whatsoever. When you're in the middle of the Arctic, or you're, in the scope's ill-defined, and it's an environment that you can't control, and all of this type of stuff, is lump sum contracting the right way to do the work? I would argue probably not.
Good.
I mean, there's a graveyard full of headstones with companies' names on it that have got EPC wrong, and I'm certainly at KBR very conscious of that, and I fully agree with Alistair. It's actually all at the front end.
Yeah.
You can use a contractual framework, any contractual framework. It's how you allocate the risk and the work you do as you lead up to actually defining those contract terms. And if you do enough of the execution planning and the scope's well defined, you can go lump sum, no problem at all.
Right.
But the true fact of the matter is that the risk sits in construction. That's where it all goes wrong. That's where the issues are. But the impact in construction all comes from engineering and procurement and getting that right. And people spend so little time at the front end of projects, or not enough time there. And when they don't spend enough time, that's when it goes wrong in the field. And everyone blames construction, but it's actually not true. It comes down to the leadership of the project and maintaining that discipline and doing enough at the front end to make sure the back end is successful.
Stuart, you talked about being realistic. Is from wave one project, have we learned our lesson being realistic? Because there's always, from the owner, contractor side, both sides, we think we can do it faster and cheaper. And is there a realism as we estimate projects and build the cost into it?
I hope so. But there always seems to be someone who comes along who says they can do it better. And there's always seems to be someone around the corner. But clearly there's massive consolidation in our industry, not just at the owner level, but obviously at the EPCs as well. We've seen that more recently with McDermott, CB&I, and obviously Foster Wheeler and Wood and things like that. So there's been quite a lot of consolidation in the industry. And I'm hoping with that consolidation, with fewer players, that there's actually realism from the contracting community not to do something silly, and that actually they want, as Andrew said, you want to do a good job and get paid fairly for that. If you do a bad job, you deserve to be beaten up, but at least you go into it with a chance of being successful. But really, I think a lot of it's a balance, isn't it? The owners have a role to play and the EPCs have a role to play. Are we seeing more realism? I think so. But does that mean that someone will not come in who wants to step up to the next level and will buy their way into the market? It happens time and again and time and again and time and again. And unfortunately, that's why there's a lot of headstones in that graveyard.
Yeah, that's good. So let's switch on. I think we talked about technology disruptions. You hear a lot of buzzwords on digitization, AI, machine learning, and all kind of it's been very effective in the consumer industry, and it's making ways into our process industry. And so next 5 years, what do you see technology this impacting our business, and especially in the project size? How do you see it next 5 years from now, and how are you preparing for it? And just help us understand, share your company vision in that space.
Well, I think our view is it's going to be a revolution, not an evolution. Our industry is going to fundamentally change in the next 5 years. I think we're finally leaning forward and saying it's not acceptable to be the worst performing industry from a perspective of productivity. And I think we're all leaning forward and really trying to find a way to innovate, trying to find a way to abandon drawings and get data focused. I think to abandon the silos of engineering, procurement, construction and become system focused, to get data real time, leveraging AI, leveraging data analytics. I'd never thought I'd sit up in a panel today and talk about the fact that we have data scientists on our book at Bechtel. I'm sure many other companies sitting here the same thing. We have data analytics centers. We have all of it, leveraging all of this massive amount of data. We've never been shy of collecting data. Mm-hmm. The challenge that we've had is what do we do with that data? And we're data rich, and I think the insights that we can pull out of that is going to make a massive change for our industry. But the innovation that we bring has to be bringing a solution to a problem that we have.
Right.
We shouldn't be innovating for innovating's sake and looking for a solution to solve. And I think a lot of the stuff that's out there, there's a lot of froth out there in this digital this, you know, enterprise that, innovation the other, that's looking for a problem to solve. I think we know what our issues are. I think our industry knows what our issues are. And I think we are best placed working with our customers to come up with solutions for it. And I think things will fundamentally change. And if you change the way that we execute the work, you change the way that you reward our people, you change the way that you structure your organizations, you change the way that you engage in the supply chain and with the clients. So I would say strap in. It's going to be an exciting 5 years.
Excellent. Stuart, what do you see next 5 years? What's
Yeah.
the ride look like?
Yeah, what does the ride look like? So I think no one's really mentioned standardization at all. But I do think that standardization is a wave that's come through the industry, as has actually, you know, moving away from complete bespoke specifications and things like that. I think what we're seeing is that in terms of standardization, you can move into EPF type solutions where you engineer, you procure, you fabricate, and you can design one and build many. And all you need to really do is design the foundations regardless of where it is in the world. If you think of an ethylene cracker and modularizing that, you can modularize that and build it the same everywhere in the world. Yeah. Why don't we do that? I mean, that's clearly where the industry needs to head. And actually taking a lot of the risk away from site and putting it into module yards it's not a new thing. But actually, what's new is you can do so much more work in the mod yard than we've ever considered, to the point that you're putting all the electricals, instrumentation things, and actually doing far more commissioning at the yard, and then bringing it back into the home country. But one of the things that we were looking at recently is everyone talks about digital twin, and what's really digital twin? It's a digitalized design, but it really needs to be smart. And what does that mean? So you've heard Alistair and Andrew talk about the fact that today there's, you know, at site when you're actually doing construction, there's a lot of, you know, handheld devices, tablets and things where people can go on and actually update progress and things like that. But they can do that and link it to the digital twin, so they can actually see exactly where they are in the whole evolution of the execution. But not only that, you can then use that digital twin at the next phase. If you put enough sensors on your facility, you can actually use the digital twin as a fantastic operating tool, with the right control systems and things to actually operate your plant. Yeah. And so then you can see how this whole thing is I think we're all saying the same, and that is, it's no longer going to be engineer, procure, construct, commission. It's actually going to be right through to operations. Yeah. So you're designing with the end in mind, but it's not the end in terms of handing over the keys. It's the end on how do you effectively operate the plant using that single source of truth of data, and how do you best affect that? And the technology exists today. We just need to figure out how best to utilize it and embrace it within the environments that we work.
Exactly. Andrew, what's Wood's view look like, and how you're preparing for next 5 years?
Yeah, I think look, it's really exciting. I think up until this point, we've probably dot the I's, crossed the T's, and missed the point, because we've had so many cool ideas, of which none of them offer real-life solutions, or we've just not been able to cope and implement with a fanatical consistency. So we've, like every organisation up here on the stage, is structurally reinforcing our digital and technology team, and really rationalise a suite of digital and technology-enabled projects that we're going to invest in to transform the landscape. And quite simply, it's think big, beta test quickly, but then scale with a fanatical consistency. And I think the industry has failed, you know, because there's just so much cool stuff. Yeah. Where do we deploy our expertise? So I think for us, it's about reducing the exposure hours in the field. It's about digitalising and sense-making for the supervisor. But then artificial intelligence is something that certainly no one's designed more offshore platforms than we have, nor subsea pipelines or onshore pipelines. And I think that's where artificial intelligence could really unlock the engineering sphere to get to a pragmatic construction outcome a lot faster. Yeah. But I do think, I think less is going to be more in this space as an industry, because there is so much to go after. It's exciting.
Good, Shamik, last comment there, and then we'll hand off to some Q&A with the team here.
I mean, that's the advantage or disadvantage being number 4.
Yeah.
Because, since everything has already been said,
yeah.
but no. I think just to take from what Stuart, Alistair, and Andrew said, we do see the digitalization, the standardization as key drivers. But as a company, we're seeing a couple of changes which will impact us because of that. Number one for us, the barriers between EPC contractor and suppliers, the supply chain is starting to diminish. So we already see, for us, modularization is massive. We are getting into smart modularization where we see many key vendors, suppliers, have much better and smarter ideas than we could ourselves bring in. So the ecosystem of delivering something digitized, standardized, is becoming like an open source discussion. So some of our key vendors are coming in, specifically automation, rotating, massive ideas coming from aerospace industry, automotive, where we see a big change. So that's one aspect. The second aspect, what we are seeing because of that, is the diversity of the workforce. Traditionally, this industry was all about engineers coming in and growing through. But what we just said together today, maybe we are looking for more data scientists, much more material scientists, looking at, we believe, much more women joining us into the workforce, because historically we have seen this as like a negative industry. It's changing, it's cool right now, And the last thing for us, being a process technology company, we are getting massively challenged by our customers on 2 things. And we believe in the next 5 years, we have to find solution to that. One is about energy transition. So how do we shape ourselves as an industry to be seen as taking a frontal position to drive that? Some of our customers are talking about single-use plastics. Are we going to react? How do we react to that? We don't know the answers today, but the challenge is out there for us. So, next 5 years, very exciting. How do we address this?
Excellent, Shamik. Great. Do we have any time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, Kerr? Okay, we got 3 minutes. You can use your Slido and put any comments there. I better stand up to look at it. So that's the top questions there, question. So what are the...
all the tough questions are for Andrew, right?
So what are the barriers you see for achieving breakthrough in cost efficiency? I think, so there is highlighted over there. So anyone wants to take a shot at that? The first question.
Well, again, I think this is understanding where your cost is in your capital project is really, really important. We've spent a lot of time today talking about the challenge of construction. Construction in a US Gulf Coast in a high labor dollar environment, or Australia in a high labor dollar environment, is fundamentally different than building in a low labor dollar environment. So the way that you engineer and procure should meet the cost environment that you have in construction. So I think there's never one solution that solves all, but I think really understanding where your cost is, it may be more in the supply chain than in construction, in the international arena, targeting where that cost is by the early engagement that Stuart talked about, getting us involved at the earliest possible time, right up front, even before pre-feed, looking at studies and things. We understand that we have to be competitive and all of this type of stuff, but getting us involved, getting the benefit of our interaction with your clever people, that's where we're going to take the biggest cost out, is right up front on that influence curve.
Excellent. Anything to add? We got 30, 40 seconds here. So thank you for the panel. Excellent discussion. Today we touched on many areas. And for the audience, hopefully this was very valuable for you. And good luck to everybody, and enjoy the conference here. And thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great job.